The auction block stood in the heart of Desdemona, Texas, a dusty speck on the map where fortunes were made and broken with the discovery of oil in 1918. But on this sweltering August day in 1885, the commodity being sold wasn't land or cattle, it was a woman. Madeline Wilson stood with her wrists bound, her once fine blue dress now tattered and stained with the evidence of her 3-day journey from Dallas. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her eyes, though filled with terror, held a defiance that silenced the rowdy crowd as she lifted her chin. "I am not property," she said, her voice trembling but clear enough to carry across the gathering of leering men. "I have done nothing to deserve this indignity." Sheriff Thomas Blackwell, the man who'd arranged this travesty of justice, merely laughed and shoved her forward. 22 years old, healthy as a horse and educated too, can read and write better than most men. Starting bid is $50. Madeline fought back tears, knowing they would only entertain the crowd further. Her family's farm had been seized after her father's death revealed mounting debts, but this being sold to cover those debts was beyond anything she could have imagined in her worst nightmares. The bidding started low, just as the sheriff had demanded. $50 from a toothless cattle rancher, $60 from the owner of the saloon, $75 from a man whose eyes made Madeline's skin crawl. The amounts climbed slowly as men assessed her value like she was a prize mare. $120, called out a man who looked old enough to be her grandfather, his eyes lingering on her in a way that made her stomach turn. The sheriff was about to bring down his gavel when a voice cut through the crowd. "She comes with me." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as a tall figure moved toward the auction block. Dust clung to his long coat, and his face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. But there was no mistaking the authority in his stance or the determination in his voice. "I said, she comes with me." The stranger's voice was steady, controlled, but laced with steel. Sheriff Blackwell's face contorted with anger. "This is an auction, mister. You want her, you place a bid like everyone else." The stranger lifted his head, revealing piercing blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face. He couldn't have been more than 30 years old, and despite the dust of travel, there was something unmistakably dignified about him. $500, he stated, silencing the murmurs that had risen among the crowd. Madeline's breath caught in her throat. $500 was more than her father's farm had been worth. The sheriff's eyes widened, greed momentarily overshadowing his irritation. 500 going once. No one dared challenge the stranger's bid. Sold. The gavel came down with a decisive bang. To the gentleman in the back. Cash only. The stranger approached, his spurs jingling softly with each step. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch, counted the money deliberately and placed it in the sheriff's outstretched hand. "The paperwork," the stranger said, his voice low. Sheriff Blackwell produced a bill of sale with a smug smile. "She's all yours, Cowboy. No refunds if she proves troublesome." The stranger took the paper, folded it carefully, and tucked it inside his coat. Then he turned to Madeline, his expression softening just enough for her to see compassion beneath his stern demeanor. "My name is Gabriel Evans," he said quietly, reaching up to untie her hands. "And you're free to go wherever you wish, Miss Wilson." Madeline rubbed her wrists, confusion replacing fear. "I don't understand." "We should leave town before I explain further," he replied, offering his arm. "My horse is tethered at the edge of town." Madeline hesitated. The stranger, Gabriel, had purchased her freedom at great expense, but experience had taught her to be wary of men bearing gifts. "Why should I trust you?" she whispered. Gabriel's eyes met her steadily. "Because right now, Miss Wilson, I'm offering you a choice. The first you've had in some time, I'd wager." The logic was undeniable. Madeline took his arm, and together they walked through the parting crowd, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed them. At the edge of town stood a magnificent black stallion, its coat gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Gabriel helped her mount before swinging up behind her. With a gentle nudge of his heels, they left Desdemona behind, riding toward the setting sun. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, putting distance between themselves and the town before Gabriel finally slowed the horse to a walk. My ranch is about 2 hours from here, he said, his voice close to her ear. You're welcome to stay there until you decide where you'd like to go. I can provide funds for a stagecoach to any city you name. Madeline turned slightly, trying to see his face. Why did you do this? $500 is a fortune. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment. I've seen what happens to women sold like cattle. No decent man would stand by and allow it. But why me specifically? You don't know me, he sighed, a sound almost lost in the gentle breeze. I knew your father, Jonathan Wilson. He was a good man who helped me when I first came to Texas 5 years ago. When I heard his daughter was being auctioned off in Desdemona to settle his debts, I couldn't let that stand. Madeline's eyes filled with tears. You knew my father. He gave me a job when no one else would, taught me about ranching in Texas. Gabriel's voice softened. I was sorry to hear of his passing. The mention of her father brought back a flood of memories, his kind eyes, his patient teachings, his steadfast belief that his daughter could achieve anything she set her mind to. And now this stranger, this Gabriel Evans, had appeared like an angel of mercy because of a connection to her father she'd known nothing about. Thank you, she whispered, the words entirely inadequate for what he had done. They continued their journey as the sky transformed from azure to a canvas of orange and pink. The Texas landscape stretched endlessly before them, rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional oak, a vastness that had once intimidated Madeline but now represented freedom. Gabriel's ranch appeared first as a plume of smoke rising from a chimney, then gradually revealed itself to be a modest but well-maintained property. A 2-story house stood proudly amid several outbuildings, with corrals holding horses and cattle visible in the distance. As they approached, a middle-aged woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on an apron. Mr. Evans, we weren't expecting you back so soon, she called, her expression turning curious as she noted Madeline. Gabriel dismounted and helped Madeline down from the horse. Mrs. Cooper, this is Miss Madeline Wilson. She'll be our guest for a while. Mrs. Cooper's warm brown eyes assessed Madeline quickly, taking in her disheveled appearance with a knowing glance but no judgment. Of course, Mr. Evans, I'll prepare the guest room right away. She smiled at Madeline. You must be exhausted, dear. Come inside and I'll draw you a bath. The prospect of clean water and soap nearly brought Madeline to tears again. That would be wonderful, thank you. Gabriel handed the reins of his horse to a young, stable hand who had appeared. Take care of Midnight, Jimmy. He's had a long ride. Yes, sir, Mr. Evans, the boy said eagerly. Gabriel turned back to Madeline. Mrs. Cooper will see to your needs. You'll find clean clothes in the guest room. They belonged to my sister when she visited last summer. They might not fit perfectly, but they'll do until we can arrange for more. You've already done too much, Madeline protested. Gabriel shook his head. It's the least I can do for Jonathan Wilson's daughter. We'll talk more tomorrow after you've rested. With that, he tipped his hat and walked toward one of the barns, leaving Madeline to follow Mrs. Cooper into the house. The interior of Gabriel's home was modest but comfortable, with solid furniture and simple decorations that spoke of practicality rather than ostentation. Mrs. Cooper led her upstairs to a pleasant bedroom with a window overlooking the property. The bathroom is through that door, Mrs. Cooper said, pointing. I'll have hot water brought up. There's a robe hanging behind the door you can use while I find you those clothes Mr. Evans mentioned. Left alone, Madeline moved to the window, watching as Gabriel spoke with his ranch hands in the yard below. In the fading light, she could see the respect in the men's postures as they listened to their employer. What kind of man was this Gabriel Evans, who would spend a small fortune to rescue a stranger and then offer her sanctuary without conditions? The bath was everything Madeline had hoped for, hot water that soothed her aching muscles and washed away the dirt and humiliation of the past days. Mrs. Cooper had provided lavender-scented soap and soft towels, luxuries Madeline had almost forgotten existed. Afterward, dressed in a simple but clean nightgown that had belonged to Gabriel's sister, Madeline sat on the edge of the bed, combing through her damp hair with fingers that still trembled occasionally. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Cooper's entrance with a tray of food. "Just some soup and bread," the housekeeper said, setting the tray on a small table. "Nothing too heavy after what you've been through." Madeline looked up in surprise. "How did you know?" Mrs. Cooper's expression was gentle. "Mr. Evans sent a telegram 3 days ago saying he was heading to Desdemona to prevent an injustice. When he returned with you." She shrugged. "I've been in Texas long enough to know what kind of injustices befall young women without protection." "He's a good man, then, Mr. Evans." Madeline couldn't keep the question from escaping her lips. "The very best," Mrs. Cooper confirmed without hesitation. "Came here with nothing but determination 5 years ago, worked harder than any 3 men, and built this place through honest sweat. Never raises his voice, treats his workers fair, and would give his last dollar to help someone in need." She paused. "Which he nearly did today, I suspect." The confirmation of Gabriel's character eased something in Madeline's chest. She had been right to trust him, at least for now. "Thank you, Mrs. Cooper. Get some rest, dear. Tomorrow will be easier." After Mrs. Cooper left, Madeline ate slowly, savoring each spoonful of the rich beef broth and the freshly baked bread. When she had finished, she crawled beneath the quilt and sank into the first peaceful sleep she'd had since receiving news of her father's death weeks earlier. Morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the curtains and the distant sounds of a ranch awakening, horses nickering, men calling to one another, the clang of metal tools. Madeline dressed in the clothes Mrs. Cooper had left, a simple blue skirt and white blouse that were slightly too large but clean and whole. She found her way downstairs to a kitchen filled with the aroma of coffee, bacon, and fresh bread. Mrs. Cooper was orchestrating breakfast for what seemed like an army, with 2 young women helping her. "Good morning, Miss Wilson. I hope you slept well." Mrs. Cooper's cheerful greeting made Madeline smile. "Better than I have in weeks, thank you. Mr. Evans is in his study. Said to send you in when you woke up, but first, some breakfast." She placed a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits in front of Madeline. "Can't talk business on an empty stomach." Madeline ate quickly, aware of the curious glances from the kitchen helpers but grateful they asked no questions. When she had finished, Mrs. Cooper directed her to a door at the back of the house. Gabriel's study was a surprisingly cozy room lined with bookshelves. He stood when she entered, setting aside papers he had been reviewing. "Miss Wilson, I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you, Mr. Evans." Madeline remained near the door, uncertain of the protocol in this situation. Gabriel gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Please sit, we have matters to discuss." Once she was seated, Gabriel resumed his own chair, his expression serious. "I've been looking into your father's affairs." He held up a hand when she began to protest. "I have connections in Dallas who were able to provide information. It seems the debts that led to your situation were not entirely legitimate." Madeline leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "The bank that foreclosed on your property was working with several land speculators. They've been forcing small farmers out across 3 counties. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "They falsified loan documents, added interest that was never agreed upon, and created debts out of thin air. Your father was one of many victims." The revelation stole Madeline's breath. "But how could they get away with this? Money buys influence, Miss Wilson, and the right people have been paid to look the other way." He tapped a stack of papers. "However, I've been gathering evidence against them for months. With your testimony about what happened to you, we might finally have enough to bring them to justice." Madeline's mind raced with the implications. "You mean I could get my father's farm back?" Gabriel's expression softened slightly. "I can't promise that. But at the very least, we could ensure these men face consequences for their actions and prevent them from harming others." He paused. "It would require you to stay here longer than I initially suggested, and it might be dangerous. These men have resources and won't hesitate to protect themselves." Madeline straightened in her chair. "Mr. Evans, those men stole everything from me, then treated me like property to be sold. If there's any chance of bringing them to justice, I want to help." A ghost of a smile touched Gabriel's lips. "Your father always said you had more courage than sense. I see he was right. You mentioned you knew him, but you never said how you met. Gabriel leaned back in his chair, his eyes taking on a distant look. I came to Texas with nothing. My family in Boston disowned me after I refused to join the family banking business. I wanted to build something of my own, not just inherit it. He gestured vaguely to the ranch beyond the windows. I worked my way across the country, taking whatever jobs I could find. When I reached Dallas, I was flat broke and desperate. Your father hired me to help with the harvest that year, paid me fair wages when others would have taken advantage, and taught me everything I needed to know about surviving in Texas. That sounds like my father, Madeline said softly. Always helping strays. He spoke of you often, was proud of your education, said you had your mother's intelligence and his stubbornness. Madeline felt tears threatening again. I miss him terribly. I know, Gabriel's voice was gentle. He was a good man who deserved better than what happened to him. A moment of silence passed between them, a shared acknowledgement of loss. So, Gabriel finally said, straightening in his chair, if you're determined to help, we have work to do. We need to document everything that happened, from the time the bank first approached your father until the auction in Desdemona. Every detail could be important. Madeline nodded, feeling purpose replace despair for the first time since her father's death. Where do we start? With breakfast, came Mrs. Cooper's voice from the doorway. Mr. Evans, you haven't eaten a thing, and Miss Wilson here could use another cup of coffee if she's going to spend the day reliving unpleasantness. Gabriel's serious expression cracked into a brief smile. Yes, madam. We'll be right there. As they walked to the dining room, Gabriel leaned slightly toward Madeline. Mrs. Cooper runs this household with an iron fist. Best not to argue with her. I wouldn't dream of it, Madeline replied, finding herself smiling for the first time in weeks. Over the next few days, Madeline settled into life at the Evans ranch. She spent mornings with Gabriel, meticulously documenting everything she could remember about the bank's dealings with her father. In the afternoons, she helped Mrs. Cooper with household tasks, finding comfort in the routine of practical work. Gabriel was often busy with the running of his ranch, but he made time each day to sit with Madeline, patiently listening as she recounted painful memories and asking careful questions to fill in gaps in their growing case against the corrupt bankers. On the fourth day, as they sat on the porch after dinner watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Gabriel broke their companionable silence. I received word from my contact in Dallas today. The U.S. Marshal's Office is interested in our evidence. They've been looking for a way to break up this ring of land speculators for years. Madeline turned to him, hope flaring. That's wonderful news, it is, Gabriel agreed, but it also means things will move more quickly now. The Marshal will want your testimony, and that means traveling to Dallas. The thought of returning to the city where her troubles had begun sent a chill through Madeline despite the warm evening. When would we need to go? Next week. We'd be gone for several days at least. Gabriel studied her face. Are you prepared for that? These men will be in the courtroom. You'll have to face them. Madeline took a deep breath. I'm not afraid of them anymore, Mr. Evans. It wasn't entirely true, but she was determined not to let fear rule her decisions any longer. Gabriel, he said quietly, after all we've shared these past days, I think you can call me Gabriel. The invitation to use his first name felt significant somehow, a shifting in their relationship from rescuer and rescued to something more equal, more personal. Gabriel, she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her lips. And you must call me Madeline. He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Madeline. They sat in silence as darkness fell, each lost in their own thoughts but drawing comfort from the other's presence. The journey to Dallas took 2 days by stagecoach, a jolting, dusty experience that Madeline endured with stoic determination. Gabriel sat beside her the entire way, his solid presence a buffer against the anxiety that threatened to overtake her the closer they got to the city. They arrived late in the evening and checked into a respectable hotel where Gabriel had reserved 2 adjoining rooms. After a simple dinner in the hotel restaurant, they retired early, both needing rest before meeting with the U.S. Marshal the next day. Morning came too quickly, and Madeline dressed with trembling fingers in the new clothes Gabriel had insisted on purchasing for her in Desdemona before they left, a proper traveling suit of deep green that made her feel armored for the battle ahead. Gabriel was waiting in the hotel lobby, looking different in a formal suit rather than his usual ranch attire. He seemed less comfortable but no less imposing, his natural authority evident in the way hotel staff hurried to assist him. "You look ready for battle," he commented as she approached. "I feel as though I'm marching to my execution," she admitted. Gabriel's expression softened. "You're not alone this time, Madeline. I'll be with you every step of the way." The U.S. Marshal's office was a hive of activity when they arrived. They were shown immediately to a private office where Marshal James Reynolds, a stern-faced man with a silver mustache, greeted them with brusque efficiency. "Mr. Evans, Miss Wilson, thank you for coming." He gestured to chairs in front of his desk. "We've been building a case against Theodore Hammond and his associates for years, but they're slippery as eels. Your evidence might finally be the key to bringing them down." Madeline straightened her spine. "I'll tell you everything I know, Marshal Reynolds." For the next 3 hours, Madeline recounted her story in excruciating detail, from the first visit by bank representatives after her father's death to her horrifying experience on the auction block in Desdemona. Gabriel occasionally interjected with clarifying information from his own investigation, but mostly he sat beside her, a steady, supportive presence. When she had finished, Marshal Reynolds leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "What happened to you is unconscionable, Miss Wilson, and unfortunately not unique. We've documented at least 20 similar cases in the past 2 years, though yours is the first where the victim was actually sold at auction." "Will it be enough?" Gabriel asked. The marshal nodded slowly. "With the evidence you've gathered and Miss Wilson's testimony, we have what we need to move forward with arrests. However," he fixed Madeline with a serious look, "you should understand the risks. Theodore Hammond is a powerful man with connections throughout Texas. By testifying against him, you'll be making a dangerous enemy." "I understand the risks," Madeline said firmly, "but I can't allow fear to stop me from doing what's right." Marshal Reynolds smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. "You've got spirit, Miss Wilson. We'll do our best to keep you safe." They spent the rest of the day going over details for the upcoming trial. It would be at least a month before all the necessary arrangements could be made, during which time Madeline would need to stay somewhere safe. "She'll remain at my ranch," Gabriel stated when the question arose. "It's isolated enough to be secure and my men are loyal." The marshal agreed that this seemed the wisest course. "We'll send word when we need you back in Dallas. In the meantime, keep a low profile. Hammond doesn't know about our investigation yet, but once we make arrests, his associates will be looking for ways to undermine our case." They left the marshal's office as afternoon faded toward evening, the streets of Dallas growing busy with people heading home from work or out for entertainment. "Are you hungry?" Gabriel asked as they walked back toward their hotel. Madeline realized she was famished, having been too nervous to eat much at breakfast. "Starving, actually. I know a good restaurant not far from here, nothing fancy, but the food is excellent." The restaurant was indeed unassuming from the outside, but inside it was warm and inviting, with checkered tablecloths and the mouth-watering aroma of home cooking. They were seated at a corner table, slightly removed from other diners, and Madeline felt herself relax for the first time that day. "You did well today," Gabriel said after they had ordered. The marshal was impressed. "I was terrified," Madeline admitted, "but also relieved, I think, to finally speak about everything that happened, to know that someone with authority was listening and believed me." Gabriel's eyes held hers across the table. "You're an extraordinary woman, Madeline Wilson. Most people would have broken under what you've endured." A flush of warmth spread across her cheeks at his praise. "I had help. Without you, you would have found another way," he said with certainty. "Your father always said you were the strongest person he knew." He was right. Their food arrived, momentarily halting their conversation. Madeline savored the hearty beef stew, realizing how much her appetite had returned now that the weight of her testimony had been lifted from her shoulders. As they ate, Gabriel spoke of lighter topics, amusing stories about his ranch hands, tales of his early misadventures in Texas when he'd first arrived from Boston. Madeline found herself laughing for the first time in months, the sound almost foreign to her ears. They were lingering over coffee when the door to the restaurant burst open, and three men entered, their eyes scanning the room with predatory intensity. Madeline froze as she recognized one of them, William Harris, Theodore Hammond's right-hand man at the bank. Gabriel, noting her sudden tension, turned slightly in his chair. "What is it?" the man in the gray suit, Madeline whispered. "He works for Hammond." Gabriel's expression hardened. "Don't look at them. Finish your coffee naturally, then we'll leave through the kitchen." Madeline fought to keep her hands steady as she lifted her cup, keenly aware of Harris's gaze sweeping the restaurant. Just as she thought they might escape notice, his eyes landed on their table, narrowing in recognition. "Well, well," Harris said loudly, approaching with his companions flanking him. "If it isn't Miss Wilson, we thought you'd left Dallas for good." Gabriel stood slowly, positioning himself between Madeline and the newcomers. "The lady doesn't wish to speak with you." Harris smirked, taking in Gabriel's protective stance. "And who might you be?" "Someone who doesn't appreciate interruptions during dinner," Gabriel replied, his voice deceptively calm. "I suggest you move along." Harris's expression darkened. "Listen, friend, you don't know what you're getting into. This woman's family owes a considerable debt to Mr. Hammond's bank. We've been looking for her." "Any debts have been settled," Gabriel said flatly, "and Miss Wilson is under my protection now." The two men accompanying Harris shifted, hands moving toward concealed weapons. The few remaining diners in the restaurant hastily paid their bills and departed, sensing the dangerous undercurrent in the confrontation. "Protection?" Harris laughed. "From what?" "The consequences of her father's poor financial decisions." Gabriel's voice dropped even lower. "From men who falsify loan documents and sell innocent women to settle fabricated debts." Harris's face paled slightly, then flushed with anger. "You're making accusations you can't back up, mister." "Oh, but I can," Gabriel replied with deadly certainty. "And so can the U.S. Marshal's office." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Harris's face before he masked it with bravado. "Mr. Hammond has friends in high places. Whatever you think you know won't matter. We'll see about that." Gabriel placed money on the table for their meal. "Now, if you'll excuse us." Harris stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "This isn't over. Mr. Hammond protects his interests, and he has a particular interest in Miss Wilson's property. Tell Hammond that if he or any of his men come near Miss Wilson again, they'll answer to me." Gabriel's hand moved slightly, revealing the gleam of a pistol partially concealed by his jacket. "And I won't be as civilized as I'm being now." The threat hung in the air between them for a tense moment before Harris stepped back, his expression calculating. "We'll meet again," he promised, before signaling his companions to leave. Once they had gone, Gabriel turned to Madeline, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her heart was racing. "How did they find us? Dallas isn't that large a city, and Hammond likely has people watching the marshal's office." Gabriel took her elbow gently. "We need to leave now. It's not safe to stay overnight as we planned." They exited through the kitchen as Gabriel had suggested, the cook looking unsurprised by their request when Gabriel pressed a gold coin into his hand. They emerged into an alley behind the restaurant and made their way through back streets to a different hotel from the one where they'd left their luggage. "Wait here," Gabriel instructed, leaving Madeline in a small sitting room while he spoke with the hotel manager. He returned minutes later. "I've arranged for a room for you. I'll retrieve our things from the other hotel and meet Marshal Reynolds to inform him of this development. Lock your door and don't open it for anyone but me." "You're leaving me alone." Madeline couldn't keep the fear from her voice. Gabriel's expression softened. "Only for an hour at most. You'll be safer here than traveling with me through the streets. Hammond's men are looking for us together." Reluctantly, Madeline agreed to the plan. The hotel manager escorted her to a small but clean room on the third floor, far from the street entrance. Following Gabriel's instructions, She locked the door securely once she was alone, then pushed a chair against it for good measure. The hour that followed was one of the longest of Madeline's life. Every footstep in the hallway, every creak of the building made her start with alarm. She sat rigidly in a chair by the window, watching the street below for any sign of Harris or his companions. Finally, a soft knock came at the door, followed by Gabriel's voice. "Madeline, it's me." She moved the chair and unlocked the door with trembling fingers. Gabriel stepped inside quickly, carrying their valises and wearing a grim expression. "The marshal is sending 2 deputies to escort us out of Dallas tonight," he said without preamble. "Hammond's men are watching the stagecoach office and the train station. How will we leave, then? By private coach, to a small town west of here where horses will be waiting." Gabriel set down their luggage. "The marshal is moving up his timeline. Arrests will be made tonight, including Hammond himself." Relief washed over Madeline. "So it's almost over." Gabriel's expression remained serious. "Not quite. Hammond has powerful friends. Until the trial is concluded and he's behind bars, you're still in danger." He hesitated. "There's something else." "The marshal received information today about your father's farm." Madeline tensed. "What about it?" "It appears Hammond was especially interested in your property because geological surveys suggested the presence of oil. He's been acquiring land throughout that area for the same reason." The revelation struck Madeline like a physical blow. "Oil, on our farm?" Gabriel nodded. "It's why he was so determined to force your father out and why his men have been searching for you. With you gone, the property would eventually be auctioned by the county, and Hammond would ensure he acquired it." Madeline sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the implications. If there truly was oil on her family's land, it could be worth a fortune enough to rebuild everything she had lost and more. But it also explained the ruthlessness with which Hammond had pursued her father and herself. "The marshal believes we can not only clear your father's name and invalidate the foreclosure, but potentially restore your ownership of the property," Gabriel continued. "But it will take time, and the legal battle will be complex." Madeline looked up at him, suddenly seeing clearly the risk he had taken by involving himself in her troubles. "Why are you doing all this, Gabriel? You've put yourself in danger, spent your own money, and now you're entangled in what could be a lengthy legal fight." "All for the daughter of a man who once gave you a job." Gabriel was quiet for a moment, his gaze holding hers. "Your father did more than give me a job, Madeline. He saved my life when I was at my lowest point. He reminded me of the man I wanted to be when I'd begun to forget." He moved to sit beside her on the edge of the bed. "And as for why I continue to help you, perhaps my reasons have evolved from mere obligation to your father's memory." The softness in his voice made Madeline's heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, another knock came at the door, 3 sharp raps followed by 2 softer ones. Gabriel stood immediately. "That's the marshal's signal. Our escort is here. We need to go." Disappointment mingled with the urgent need for safety. Madeline gathered her things quickly, and within moments they were following 2 grim-faced deputies down a back staircase and into an unmarked carriage waiting in an alley behind the hotel. They traveled through the night, the carriage moving swiftly along back roads to avoid detection. Madeline dozed fitfully against Gabriel's shoulder, jolting awake at every unexpected sound. Dawn was breaking when they reached a small settlement consisting of little more than a general store, a church, and a handful of houses. True to the marshal's word, fresh horses were waiting, along with supplies for the journey back to Gabriel's ranch. The deputies bid them farewell, one of them handing Gabriel a sealed envelope. "From the marshal," the deputy explained, "instructions for when you reach your property." Gabriel tucked the envelope into his coat, then helped Madeline mount her horse, a gentle mare that seemed well suited to a rider of her limited experience. "It's about a day-and-a-half ride from here," he told her as they set off. "We'll stop at a friend's homestead tonight to rest." The Texas landscape unfolded around them as they rode vast expanses of prairie interspersed with stands of oak and mesquite, the horizon seeming to stretch endlessly in all directions. Despite the circumstances of their journey, Madeline found herself appreciating the wild beauty of the country. They traveled at a steady pace, Gabriel occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing knowledge about the plants and animals they encountered. The conversation helped distract Madeline from the ache in her muscles as the hours passed. By late afternoon, she was struggling to maintain her posture in the saddle, unused to such prolonged riding. Gabriel noticed her discomfort immediately. "There's a creek about a mile ahead," he said. "We'll rest there before the final push to my friend's place." The creek proved to be a welcome respite, a ribbon of clear water cutting through a grove of cottonwoods that provided blessed shade. Gabriel helped Madeline dismount, his hands lingering at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said, wincing slightly as her feet touched the ground. "You're doing remarkably well for someone unaccustomed to long rides," Gabriel commented, leading the horses to water. "Most city folk would be complaining bitterly by now." Madeline laughed despite her discomfort. "I grew up on a farm, remember? I'm not entirely unfamiliar with physical exertion." She moved to the creek's edge, kneeling to splash cool water on her face and neck. Gabriel removed his hat, running a hand through hair dampened by sweat. "Still, it's been a grueling day, especially after the events in Dallas." Mention of the city sobered Madeline instantly. "Do you think the marshal succeeded in arresting Hammond? If anyone can bring Hammond to justice, it's Reynolds." Gabriel took a drink from his canteen, then passed it to Madeline. "But we won't know for certain until we reach the ranch and can receive messages safely." They rested for nearly an hour, eating a simple meal of jerky and hardtack from their supplies. As they prepared to continue their journey, Gabriel suddenly stiffened, his head turning sharply toward a sound Madeline couldn't detect. "Get behind that boulder," he said quietly, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. "Now." Madeline obeyed without question, heart pounding as she crouched behind the large rock. Gabriel moved swiftly to the horses, positioning himself where he could see the approach to their resting spot while appearing casual, as if merely adjusting his saddle. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and Madeline held her breath as 3 riders came into view. They slowed as they spotted Gabriel, and she recognized with horror the man in the lead, William Harris. "Well, look who we have here," Harris called, his voice carrying easily across the clearing. "The protective gentleman from the restaurant." Gabriel's posture remained relaxed, but Madeline could see the tension in his shoulders. "Seems like a long way from Dallas just to continue a conversation, Mr. Harris." Harris smiled unpleasantly. "Mr. Hammond was very interested to hear about your interference. Even more interested when he learned your name, Gabriel Evans, former heir to the Evans banking fortune of Boston." Madeline felt a jolt of surprise. Gabriel had mentioned coming from Boston, but he'd never indicated his family was wealthy, let alone that he'd been heir to a banking fortune. "That was another lifetime," Gabriel replied evenly. "What do you want, Harris?" Harris dismounted, his companions remaining on their horses with hands resting visibly on weapons. "Initially, just to deliver a message from Mr. Hammond. He's willing to be generous if you step aside and allow us to escort Miss Wilson back to Dallas." "And now?" Gabriel asked, clearly noting the past tense. "Now I'm wondering where you've hidden her." Harris's eyes scanned the clearing. "She's not much of a rider, couldn't have gone far on her own." Gabriel shrugged. "Who says she was with me?" "I put her on the eastbound train this morning while you were busy following false leads." Harris's expression darkened. "You're lying. Our men watched every train out of Dallas." "Did they watch the private car attached to the freight train that left before dawn?" Gabriel countered smoothly. "The marshal has resources you might not anticipate." Uncertainty flickered across Harris's face, quickly replaced by anger. "If you've helped her escape, Hammond will ensure you regret it. Your ranch, your reputation, everything you've built will be destroyed." Gabriel's laugh held no humor. "You might want to check on your employer before making threats in his name. Last I heard, Marshal Reynolds was paying him a visit last night." Harris paled visibly. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Gabriel's hand moved almost imperceptibly closer to his weapon. "Why don't you ride back to Dallas and find out? unless you'd prefer to continue this conversation in a manner that ends badly for you and your friends." The standoff stretched for several tense heartbeats before Harris glanced at his companions. "This isn't over, Evans. Hammond has friends beyond Dallas, and Miss Wilson's property is worth too much to simply walk away from." "Consider this your only warning, Harris," Gabriel said, his voice hardening. "Come after Miss Wilson again, and I'll ensure you never trouble anyone else." Harris spat on the ground, then remounted his horse. "We'll see who's giving warnings when this is finished." With a sharp gesture to his companions, he turned his horse and galloped away, the others following close behind. Madeline waited until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely before emerging from her hiding place, legs shaking with a combination of fear and relief. "That was too close," she whispered as Gabriel strode toward her. "Too close indeed." His expression was grim as he helped her to her feet. "We need to move quickly. They'll realize I was lying about the train once they have time to think clearly." They mounted their horses and set off at a faster pace than before, Gabriel leading them away from the main trail and across country where they would be harder to track. The sun was setting when they finally approached a small homestead nestled in a protected valley, a modest cabin with smoke rising from the chimney, and a barn where a lantern glowed warmly. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a shock of white hair emerged from the barn as they approached, a shotgun held casually but visibly in his hands. "Who goes there?" he called. "It's Gabriel Evans, Josiah. We spoke last month at the cattle auction." The man lowered his weapon immediately. Gabriel wasn't expecting visitors. His eyes moved to Madeline. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Madeline Wilson," Gabriel replied. "We're in need of shelter for the night, old friend, and perhaps some discretion." Understanding dawned on Josiah's weathered face. "Trouble following you?" "Might be," Gabriel acknowledged. "We had a run-in with some unsavory characters a few hours back." Josiah nodded once. "Bring your horses into the barn. My wife's got stew on the stove, and there's a spare room for the lady. You can bed down in the hayloft, Gabriel, like old times." The inside of the cabin was warm and inviting, with rough-hewn furniture softened by colorful quilts and the delicious aroma of cooking food. Josiah's wife, Martha, welcomed them with the easy hospitality of frontier women accustomed to unexpected guests. "You look dead on your feet, dear," she said to Madeline. "Let me show you where you can wash up before supper." After a hearty meal that Madeline was too exhausted to fully appreciate, Martha showed her to a small but clean bedroom. The last thing Madeline remembered was Gabriel's voice from the main room, explaining in low tones to Josiah about their situation, before sleep claimed her completely. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, sunlight streaming through a small window. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, panic gripping her until the events of the previous day came flooding back. She dressed quickly in the same clothes she'd worn the day before, wishing for a change but grateful for the safety of their current refuge. Gabriel and Josiah were at the table when she emerged, heads bent over what appeared to be a map. "Good morning," Gabriel said, looking up with a smile that warmed something deep inside her. "Did you sleep well?" "Like the dead," Madeline admitted, accepting a cup of coffee from Martha. "What time is it?" "Just after 7, Josiah replied. "Gabriel here was just showing me the route you'll be taking to avoid the main trails." Madeline sipped her coffee, the strong brew helping to clear the last cobwebs of sleep from her mind. "How much farther to your ranch?" "If we push hard, we can make it by nightfall," Gabriel said. "Josiah's lending us fresh horses and will return ours when he heads to town next week." "That's very kind," Madeline said, turning to their host. Josiah waved away her thanks. "Any friend of Gabriel's is a friend of mine. Besides, I owe him for helping my son get his start in the cattle business last year." After breakfast, they prepared to depart. Martha packed food for their journey, and Josiah provided Gabriel with a rifle in addition to the pistol he already carried. "Just in case," the older man said grimly. "Word at the saloon in town last week was that strangers have been asking questions about properties in the area, including yours, Gabriel." Gabriel nodded, his expression serious. Keep your eyes open, Josiah. If anyone comes looking for us, we never saw you, Josiah finished. Be careful, friend. The horses Josiah provided were strong and fresh, allowing them to make good time across the rugged terrain. Gabriel led them through valleys and gullies rather than over ridgelines where they might be spotted, occasionally stopping to listen for pursuit or check their back trail. By mid-afternoon, Madeline could see that the landscape was becoming familiar to Gabriel, his confidence in their route increasing as they entered his territory. They stopped briefly by a spring to rest the horses and eat some of the food Martha had prepared. "We're about 2 hours from the ranch," Gabriel said as they sat in the shade of a large oak tree. "Once we're there, you'll be safe. My men are loyal and the property is well defended." Madeline studied his profile as he scanned the horizon, noting the strength in his jaw, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting in the Texas sun. Over the past days, her feelings toward him had shifted dramatically from gratitude to a rescuer, to respect for his principles, and now to something deeper that made her pulse quicken when he looked at her. "Harris mentioned you were heir to a banking fortune," she said, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "You never mentioned that." Gabriel's expression tightened momentarily. "It wasn't relevant, and it's not who I am anymore." "But it's part of your story," Madeline pressed gently. "The same way my father's farm is part of mine." He was quiet for a long moment before sighing. "My family owns one of the largest banks in Boston. I was expected to join the business, marry a suitable society woman, and continue the Evans dynasty." His mouth twisted in a sardonic smile. "I had different ideas. I wanted to build something of my own, not simply inherit my father's empire." "So you left everything behind, just like that?" Gabriel shook his head. "Not just like that. There were arguments, ultimatums, threats of disinheritance. When I stood firm, my father followed through on those threats. I left Boston with whatever money I'd managed to save from my allowance, which didn't last long. And now, do you ever regret your decision?" His eyes met hers, unexpectedly intense. "Never, especially not now." Something in his gaze made Madeline's cheeks flush with warmth that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. She looked away first, focusing on repacking their food supplies. "We should continue," she said, her voice not quite steady. "I think I hear thunder in the distance." Gabriel glanced at the horizon where dark clouds were indeed gathering. "Good catch. We don't want to be caught in a Texas thunderstorm if we can avoid it." They rode harder as the clouds built, racing the approaching storm. The wind picked up, bringing with it the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Madeline's muscles protested the increased pace, but she gritted her teeth against the discomfort, determined not to slow them down. Finally, as fat raindrops began to fall, Gabriel pointed ahead to where buildings were just visible in the gathering gloom. "There, that's the ranch." They galloped the final distance, reaching the main house just as the heavens opened in earnest. "Mrs. Cooper appeared at the door, alarm on her face at their sudden arrival. "Mr. Evans, Miss Wilson, we weren't expecting you for days yet." "Change of plans," Gabriel said tersely as he helped Madeline dismount. Her legs nearly buckled as she hit the ground, and he steadied her with a strong arm around her waist. "Is Jimmy around to take the horses?" "Right here, boss." The young stable hand appeared from the barn, running through the downpour to take the reins. "Inside, Mrs. Cooper fussed over them, insisting they change into dry clothes before telling their tale. Madeline gratefully accepted the offer of a hot bath, sinking into the steaming water with a sigh of relief for her aching muscles. By the time she emerged, dressed in a simple house dress, Mrs. Cooper had provided, the storm was in full force outside, rain lashing at the windows and thunder shaking the very foundation of the house. She found Gabriel in his study, poring over the contents of the envelope the marshal's deputy had given him. "Any news?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, his face grave. "Mixed. Hammond was arrested as planned, but he's already posted bail an astronomical amount that would bankrupt most men. The marshal expects him to flee before trial." Madeline's heart sank. "So all of this was for nothing?" "Not at all." Gabriel held up a document. The marshal included this a court order invalidating the foreclosure on your father's farm based on evidence of fraud. The property legally belongs to you again, Madeline. Joy surged through her, unexpected and overwhelming. Truly, the farm is mine. Gabriel smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since Dallas. Truly. You can return whenever you wish, though the marshal strongly advises waiting until Hammond is apprehended. Madeline sank into a chair, emotions tumbling through her like the storm outside. Relief, joy, vindication, and beneath it all, a curious reluctance at the thought of leaving Gabriel's ranch. I don't know what to say, she whispered. How to thank you for everything you've done. You don't need to thank me. Gabriel set aside the papers and moved to kneel beside her chair. Your father would have done the same for me, for anyone he considered a friend. But you went far beyond friendship, Gabriel. You risked your life, your reputation, spent a small fortune. She reached out hesitantly, her fingers touching his cheek. Why? His eyes held hers, something vulnerable in their depths that she hadn't seen before. Because somewhere between hearing about Jonathan Wilson's daughter being sold at auction and seeing your courage in the face of unspeakable injustice, I began to care for you in ways that have nothing to do with obligation or honor. Madeline's heart stuttered in her chest. Gabriel. You don't need to say anything, he continued quickly. I understand that you've been through a terrible ordeal, and the last thing you need is— She silenced him by pressing her fingers gently against his lips. The last thing I need, she said softly, is for you to tell me what I need or don't need. Surprise flashed across his face, followed by a cautious hope. What are you saying, Madeline? I'm saying that in the midst of the worst experience of my life, I found something unexpected, someone who showed me that not all men are like Hammond and his ilk. Someone who respects me as a person, not property. Someone who makes me feel safe, yet somehow also makes my heart race when he looks at me. She took a deep breath. I'm saying that I've come to care for you too, Gabriel Evans. For a moment he seemed frozen, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then slowly he raised his hand to capture hers, turning it to press a kiss to her palm. I never expected this, he admitted. When I rode into Desdemona that day, I was only thinking of honoring your father's memory by saving his daughter from injustice. I wasn't prepared for the woman I found so brave, so determined, so utterly captivating. The thunder crashed outside, but neither of them noticed, lost in each other's gaze. What happens now? Madeline asked softly. Gabriel stood, drawing her up with him. Now we wait for word that Hammond has been recaptured. Then, when it's safe, I'll escort you back to your farm if that's what you wish. And if that's not what I wish, his eyes darkened slightly. What do you wish, Madeline? I don't know yet, she admitted. The farm is my heritage, my father's legacy, but the idea of returning there alone. You wouldn't have to be alone, Gabriel said carefully. I could visit, or— He hesitated, or, she prompted, or I could come with you, help you rebuild. My foreman is more than capable of running this place for extended periods. The offer touched her deeply, but something in his careful phrasing gave her pause. Is that what you want, to leave the ranch you've built? Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty from a man usually so controlled. What I want is to be where you are, Madeline. I've built one life already. I could build another, but I won't ask you to abandon your heritage when you fought so hard to reclaim it. The sincerity in his voice moved her beyond words. Standing on tiptoe, Madeline pressed her lips to his in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened as Gabriel's arms came around her, pulling her close against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Madeline rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the rapid beating of his heart. Perhaps there's a third option, she murmured, one we haven't considered yet. I'm open to suggestions, Gabriel replied, his voice rough with emotion. We don't have to decide everything tonight, Madeline said, looking up at him. We have time now, thanks to you, time to think, to plan, to see where this leads. She gestured between them. Gabriel smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face and made her heart skip a beat. Time is a luxury I didn't expect when I rode into Desdemona. I'm happy to use it wisely. The storm raged on outside, but within the walls of the ranch house, Madeline Wilson had found an unexpected harbor, and perhaps, if fortune favored them, the beginning of a new chapter in a story she had thought ended with her father's death. The next few weeks passed in a curious mixture of tension and contentment at the Evans ranch. Gabriel maintained a vigilant guard, with men patrolling the property boundaries and all visitors scrutinized carefully before being allowed onto the property. Yet within this protective bubble, Madeline found herself flourishing in ways she hadn't imagined possible after the trauma she'd endured. Mrs. Cooper took her under wing, teaching her the intricacies of managing a large household. Though Madeline had run her father's modest farm for years, Gabriel's operation was on a different scale entirely, with bunkhouses for ranch hands, a cookhouse that fed dozens of men daily, and a main house that, while not lavish, required significant maintenance. She quickly made herself useful, using her education to help Gabriel with his account books in the evenings, and spending her days learning everything she could about ranch operations. The work gave her purpose and helped keep at bay the darker thoughts that sometimes threatened when she remembered her time on the auction block. Gabriel watched her adaptation to ranch life with evident admiration, often finding reasons to include her in discussions about cattle breeding or pasture rotation that might ordinarily have excluded a woman. His respect for her intelligence was obvious, as was his growing affection, expressed in small gestures rather than grand declarations, a hand at the small of her back as they walked to dinner, a wildflower left on her breakfast plate, the way his eyes sought hers across a room. They were careful, maintaining propriety under Mrs. Cooper's watchful eye, but their feelings developed steadily in the relative peace of those weeks. Each evening they would sit on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset and talking of their pasts, their hopes, their beliefs. Madeline learned about Gabriel's childhood in Boston, the pressure of being the only son of a banking magnate, the expectations that had nearly crushed his spirit. In turn, she shared stories of her mother, who had died when Madeline was 12, and the close relationship she developed with her father afterward as they worked side by side to keep their farm profitable. Word came periodically from Marshal Reynolds, carried by trusted deputies who changed their routes each time to avoid being followed. Theodore Hammond had indeed fled Dallas, but was being tracked through his financial transactions. Several of his associates had turned state's evidence, providing details of the land fraud scheme that had victimized dozens of farmers, including Madeline's father. One evening in early October, as the first hint of autumn crispness touched the air, Gabriel found Madeline in the kitchen garden, harvesting the last of the summer vegetables with Mrs. Cooper. "A letter just arrived from the marshal," he said, his expression unreadable. "Hammond has been apprehended trying to board a ship to Europe. He's being brought back to Dallas to stand trial." Madeline straightened, wiping soil from her hands. "When will the trial begin?" "Next month. Reynolds requests your presence as soon as possible to prepare your testimony. Mrs. Cooper, ever sensitive to undercurrents, murmured something about checking on dinner and disappeared into the house, leaving them alone among the neat rows of plants. "So it's time," Madeline said quietly, "to return to Dallas." Gabriel nodded, watching her face carefully. "And after the trial, to your farm, I presume?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. In their evening conversations, they had carefully avoided discussing the future in concrete terms, content to let their feelings develop naturally without the pressure of decisions that seemed distant. Now, suddenly, those decisions loomed immediate and unavoidable. "I don't know," Madeline admitted. "I've thought about it often these past weeks. The farm is my heritage, yes, but..." Gabriel prompted gently when she trailed off. Madeline gestured around them, encompassing the garden, the ranch buildings, the land stretching toward the horizon. "But I've found something here I never expected, a sense of belonging, of purpose." She met his gaze directly. "Of home." Hope flared in Gabriel's eyes, though he kept his voice measured. "This could be your home, Madeline, for as long as you wish it. As your guest, your ward." She shook her head. I've lived under the protection of men all my life, first my father, then you. I need to stand on my own, Gabriel, to know that I can provide for myself." "I understand," he said, though disappointment was evident in the set of his shoulders. "Your independence is important to you. I would never want to compromise that." Madeline stepped closer, taking his hands in hers. "But that doesn't mean I want to leave you. These weeks have shown me what's possible between a man and woman who respect each other as equals. I've never felt that before, not with the men who courted me in Dallas, certainly not with the men who bid on me in Desdemona." Gabriel's fingers tightened around hers. "What are you saying, Madeline?" "I'm saying that I love you, Gabriel Evans. And I believe you love me too, though you've been too much of a gentleman to press your advantage while I've been under your protection." A smile broke across his face, transforming his serious features. "I do love you, Madeline Wilson. More than I thought possible when I first saw you on that auction block. Then perhaps there's a solution that honors both my need for independence and our feelings for each other." "I'm listening," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "The marshal's letter mentions Hammond's capture, but does it say anything about the oil believed to be on my family's property?" Gabriel nodded slowly. "Initial surveys have confirmed it. Your land could be quite valuable if you choose to lease the mineral rights." "Valuable enough to provide me with financial independence. Many times over," Gabriel confirmed. "You could be a wealthy woman, Madeline." She took a deep breath. "Then I propose a partnership. I maintain ownership of my father's farm, lease the mineral rights for income, but make my home here with you. Not as your ward or dependent, but as your wife, bringing my own wealth and property to the marriage, standing as your equal." Gabriel's eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and joy crossing his features. "Are you proposing to me, Madeline Wilson?" She laughed, the sound carrying across the garden. "I suppose I am. Is that terribly forward of me?" In answer, Gabriel pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words could not desire: respect, love, and a promise of partnership unlike anything either had dared hope for. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Gabriel pressed his forehead to hers. "I should warn you, Mrs. Cooper will be scandalized if we announce an engagement without proper courtship." "Then court me," Madeline suggested, her eyes dancing. "On the journey to Dallas and back, by the time the trial is over and Hammond faces justice, we can make our announcement properly." Gabriel's smile was radiant. "A wise compromise, as always. You'll make an exceptional rancher's wife, Madeline Wilson. And you'll make an exceptional oil heiress's husband," she countered with a grin. Their laughter mingled in the garden as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land that would soon be their shared home, a home built on respect, equality, and a love that had begun in the unlikeliest of circumstances, with trembling defiance and 5 simple words. "She comes with me." The trial of Theodore Hammond became one of the most sensational legal proceedings in Dallas history. The courthouse was packed daily with spectators eager to witness the downfall of a man who had seemed untouchable, whose financial empire had influenced every aspect of commerce in northern Texas for decades. Madeline's testimony came on the 3rd day, after several of Hammond's former associates had already detailed the elaborate scheme of falsified documents, intimidation, and corruption that had allowed them to seize properties across 3 counties. She entered the courtroom with her head held high, Gabriel a reassuring presence in the gallery behind her. As she recounted her experiences, from the suspicious circumstances of her father's loan to the horror of being sold at auction to settle a fabricated debt, the courtroom fell silent, hanging on every word. Even hardened newsmen were seen wiping away tears as she described standing on the auction block, hearing men bid on her as if she were livestock. "And then what happened, Miss Wilson?" the prosecutor asked, after she had described the bidding reaching $120. Madeline's eyes found Gabriel's in the gallery. "A stranger arrived. He said simply, 'She comes with me,' and bid $500. No one challenged him, and this stranger was Mr. Gabriel Evans," she replied, a small smile touching her lips. "A man who had once worked for my father and came to repay that kindness." Did Mr. Evans explain his actions to you afterward? He told me he suspected fraud in my father's dealings with Mr. Hammond's bank. He had been gathering evidence for months, which he later shared with Marshal Reynolds. The prosecutor nodded, satisfied. Thank you, Miss Wilson. No further questions. Hammond's attorney, a slick man from Chicago with an expensive suit and practiced sneer, approached for cross-examination. His strategy quickly became apparent to paint Madeline as a naive young woman who had misunderstood business dealings beyond her comprehension. Miss Wilson, isn't it possible that your father simply mismanaged his finances and failed to inform you of the extent of his borrowing? Madeline met his gaze steadily. My father kept meticulous records, sir. I managed our accounts for the last 3 years of his life. There was no legitimate loan for the amount Mr. Hammond claimed. The attorney switched tactics. And this auction in Desdemona, isn't it possible you misunderstood the nature of the proceedings? That it was merely an attempt to find you suitable employment to work off your father's debts? Anger flashed in Madeline's eyes. I was bound at the wrists, displayed before a crowd of men who bid money for the right to take me away. Sheriff Blackwell explicitly told the bidders they could use me however they saw fit. There was no misunderstanding, sir. A murmur ran through the courtroom, and the judge had to bang his gavel for order. The defense attorney, sensing he was losing ground, tried one final approach. Isn't it convenient, Miss Wilson, that Mr. Evans appeared at precisely the right moment to rescue you? A man who, by your own admission, had a grudge against Mr. Hammond's banking practices. Madeline straightened in her chair. There was nothing convenient about it, sir. Mr. Evans rode for 2 days after learning of my situation. And his grudge, as you call it, was based on witnessing the same fraudulent practices that victimized my father being used against dozens of other farmers. The attorney opened his mouth to continue, but Hammond himself tugged at his sleeve, shaking his head slightly. The defense attorney frowned but conceded. No further questions, Your Honor. As Madeline left the witness stand, she caught a glimpse of Hammond's face, a mixture of resignation and calculation that made her shiver despite the warm courtroom. Gabriel met her at the gates separating the gallery from the court floor, offering his arm with a proud smile. You were magnificent, he whispered as they exited into the hallway. I was terrified, she admitted once they were alone. But telling the truth, seeing him have to face what he's done. It helped. Gabriel squeezed her hand. The marshal believes the jury will convict on all counts. Hammond will spend years in prison. Good, Madeline said firmly, though no punishment seems adequate for the lives he's destroyed. The trial continued for another week, with expert witnesses detailing the financial machinations behind Hammond's scheme and character witnesses attesting to Madeline's father's reputation for honesty. Throughout it all, Gabriel remained by Madeline's side, his steady presence a reminder of why she had found the strength to testify. Their courtship, conducted in stolen moments between court sessions and preparations with the prosecutor, deepened with each passing day. Gabriel took her to dinner at the finest restaurant in Dallas, bought her a new dress when she mentioned needing something appropriate for court, and arranged for a buggy ride through the city park on a rare day when they weren't required at the courthouse. In these moments, Madeline saw new sides of the man she had come to love, his dry wit that could make her laugh even after the most stressful day of testimony, his thoughtfulness in remembering small details she mentioned in passing, his unwavering respect for her opinions even when they differed from his own. By the time the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, sentencing Hammond to 15 years in prison and substantial financial restitution to his victims, Madeline was more certain than ever of her decision to accept Gabriel's proposal, or rather, to have hers accepted by him. They celebrated the verdict with a quiet dinner at their hotel, away from the reporters who had been hounding them for statements about the case. To justice, Gabriel said, raising his glass of wine. And to new beginnings, Madeline added, touching her glass to his. His eyes held hers across the table. Speaking of new beginnings, I have something for you. From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box, sliding it across the table toward her. Madeline's breath caught as she opened it to reveal a ring, a modest but beautiful diamond set in gold, with smaller sapphires on either side. "It was my grandmother's," Gabriel explained. "The only family heirloom I took when I left Boston. I've carried it with me these 5 years, waiting for the right woman to give it to." "Gabriel," Madeline whispered, overcome with emotion. "I know you proposed to me," he said with a smile, "and I accepted, but I thought perhaps you might still want the traditional gesture." He rose from his chair and, to Madeline's astonishment, knelt beside her in the middle of the restaurant. "Madeline Wilson, you are the bravest, most principled, most captivating woman I have ever known. You've faced horrors that would break most people and emerged stronger. You've taught me that partnership, true partnership between equals, is possible." He took the ring from its box. "Will you marry me, share your life with mine, and allow me the honor of calling you my wife?" Tears blurred Madeline's vision as she nodded, not trusting her voice for a moment. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, Gabriel, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her to her feet, kissing her right there in the restaurant to the applause of the other diners who had witnessed the proposal. Their return to the ranch was met with celebration from the entire staff, Mrs. Cooper wiping away tears of joy when they announced their engagement. Plans for a December wedding began immediately, with Madeline insisting on a simple ceremony at the ranch rather than a grand affair in Dallas. "I've had enough of city society to last a lifetime," she told Gabriel when he suggested she might want something more elaborate. "I want to be married here, where I found happiness again, surrounded by people who have become like family to me." In the weeks leading up to the wedding, they made one journey to Madeline's farm, accompanied by a representative from an oil company interested in leasing the mineral rights. The property looked smaller than Madeline remembered, the house more dilapidated after standing empty for months. Yet standing there with Gabriel beside her, she felt not grief but a sense of completion, as if a chapter of her life was closing properly, with dignity, rather than being ripped away as Hammond had intended. She walked through the empty rooms, touching the marks on the wall where her mother had measured her height as a child, standing in the kitchen where her father had taught her to make biscuits, looking out the window at the fields they had worked together. "Are you all right?" Gabriel asked gently, coming to stand beside her. Madeline nodded, leaning against his shoulder. "I'm saying goodbye, I think, not forgetting never that, but acknowledging that my life has moved in a direction my father could never have foreseen." "He would be proud of you," Gabriel said. "Of your courage, your determination to see justice done." "I think he would have liked you very much," Madeline replied, smiling up at him, "though he might have given you a stern talking to about rescuing his daughter without proper introduction first." Gabriel laughed, the sound echoing in the empty house. "I would have endured any number of stern talks for the privilege of knowing you, Madeline Wilson." The oil company's offer was generous, a substantial signing bonus and ongoing royalties that would indeed provide Madeline with the financial independence she valued. After consultation with a lawyer Gabriel trusted, she signed the lease agreement, arranging for the majority of the proceeds to be invested for the future, with a portion set aside to establish a fund for other farmers who might find themselves victims of predatory lending. "A fitting tribute to your father," Gabriel said when she explained her idea, continuing his legacy of helping others. They were married on the second Saturday in December, with the ranch decorated in evergreens and red ribbons for the occasion. The ceremony took place in the main house, with Gabriel's ranch hands and their families filling every available space. Madeline wore a gown of ivory silk ordered from Dallas, her dark hair adorned with a crown of winter berries and white flowers that Mrs. Cooper had arranged. Josiah, who had sheltered them during their escape from Hammond's men, performed the ceremony, having revealed that he was also a circuit riding minister in addition to his ranching activities. "Dearly beloved," he began, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the crowded room. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, a testament to God's mysterious ways and the power of human courage." Madeline, standing before Josiah with her hands clasped in Gabriel's, felt a profound sense of rightness, as if her entire life, including its recent tragedies, had been leading to this moment, this man, this future they would build together. Do you, Gabriel Evans, take Madeline Wilson to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? Gabriel's blue eyes, normally so controlled, shone with naked emotion as he answered, I do. And do you, Madeline Wilson, take Gabriel Evans to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do, Madeline replied, her voice clear and certain. Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Josiah smiled broadly. You may kiss your bride, Gabriel. The kiss was gentle yet profound, a promise sealed before witnesses that transcended the mere words of their vows. When they turned to face the assembled guests, now officially Mr. and Mrs. Evans, the cheer that went up nearly raised the roof of the old ranch house. The celebration continued well into the night, with a feast prepared under Mrs. Cooper's exacting supervision and music, provided by several ranch hands who proved surprisingly talented with fiddle and guitar. Madeline danced until her feet ached, first with Gabriel and then with nearly every man present, all of whom treated her with the respect due not just to the boss's new wife, but to a woman who had earned their admiration in her own right. As midnight approached, Gabriel led her away from the festivities, which showed no signs of abating, toward the small cabin a quarter-mile from the main house that had been prepared for their first night as husband and wife. Built originally as a line shack but renovated extensively over the previous weeks, it offered privacy while still being close enough to the ranch headquarters for practicality. Welcome home, Mrs. Evans, Gabriel said as he carried her across the threshold, setting her gently on her feet in the cabin, warmed by a fire already burning in the stone fireplace. Madeline took in the simple but comfortable furnishings: a large bed with a colorful quilt, a small table set with flowers and a bottle of champagne, rugs on the plank floor to ward off the December chill, and felt tears of happiness threatening. It's perfect, she whispered, turning to face her husband. Everything is perfect. Gabriel traced the line of her cheek with gentle fingers. You're perfect, Madeline Evans, and I intend to spend the rest of my life being worthy of the gift you've given me by becoming my wife. Their kiss deepened, months of carefully maintained propriety giving way to the passion they had kept in check until this moment. As Gabriel's hands moved to the buttons at the back of her wedding gown, Madeline surrendered to the certainty that this man, this love, this life they would build together was where she truly belonged. 5 years later, on a warm spring afternoon, Madeline Evans sat on the porch of the main ranch house, watching her 3-year-old son Jonathan and 18-month-old daughter Elizabeth playing under the watchful eye of Mrs. Cooper in the shade of a large oak tree. Her hand rested on the gentle swell of her belly, evidence of the third child expected to join their family in the fall. The Evans ranch had prospered beyond expectation in the years since their marriage. The oil discovered on Madeline's family farm had indeed proved valuable, providing capital that allowed them to expand their cattle operation and implement modern breeding techniques Gabriel had studied but previously couldn't afford to adopt. Equally importantly, they had established the Wilson Memorial Fund, which provided low-interest loans to small farmers throughout the region, helping dozens of families weather difficult times without losing their land to predatory lenders. Madeline personally oversaw the fund, her education and natural financial acumen making her a respected figure in regional banking circles, a development that still amused Gabriel, given his own family's banking background that he had rejected. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention, and she smiled as she saw Gabriel riding toward the house, returning from a morning spent checking the far pastures where new calves were being born. He dismounted with the easy grace that still made her heart beat faster, handing the reins to Jimmy, now promoted to full ranch hand status, before striding toward the porch. "How are my favorite people?" he called, pausing to swing little Jonathan into the air, eliciting delighted squeals, before continuing to where Madeline sat. "We're all well," she replied as he bent to kiss her. "Though your son has declared his intention to become a cowboy today and refuses to answer to anything but texts." Gabriel laughed, settling into the chair beside hers. "A fine ambition for an Evans man, and how is the newest Evans progressing?" His hand covered hers on her belly. "Active like his siblings," Madeline said, "though Mrs. Cooper insists it's a girl this time. She claims the baby sits differently." "Boy or girl, as long as he or she has your spirit and determination, I'll be a happy father." Gabriel's eyes, still as blue and intense as when they'd first met, held hers with familiar warmth. Madeline squeezed his hand. "I received a letter from Marshal Reynolds today. He's retiring next month after 30 years of service." "Well deserved," Gabriel commented. "I don't think he's taken a day of rest since we've known him." "He mentioned that Hammond is being released early for good behavior," Madeline continued more quietly. "He'll have served just over 7 years of his 15-year sentence." Gabriel's expression grew serious. "How do you feel about that?" Madeline considered the question carefully. "Oddly at peace. Hammond is a broken man now, his financial empire dismantled, his reputation destroyed. The years in prison have aged him tremendously, according to the marshal." She looked out at their children playing in the yard, at the prosperous ranch stretching to the horizon, at the life they had built together. "He meant to ruin me, to take everything from me. Instead, his actions led me to you, to this place, to a happiness greater than anything I could have imagined." Gabriel's fingers interlaced with hers. "From the moment I saw you standing on that auction block in Desdemona, head held high despite your fear, I knew you were extraordinary. But even I couldn't have predicted how completely you would transform my life, Madeline." "We transformed each other's lives," she corrected gently. "Partners in all things, remember? Partners in all things," he agreed with a smile. "Always." As the Texas sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the land in hues of gold and amber, Gabriel and Madeline Evans sat together on their porch, watching their children play, surrounded by the life they had built on a foundation of respect, equality, and a love that had begun with 5 simple words spoken in defiance of injustice. "She comes with me."